So what do you want to build today? I mean, we can give ourselves our topic and then we can jump from there, or we can kind of work our way in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been writing a lot of science fiction. Basically, all the stories I've written in these challenges have been science fiction, which is weird because I don't, it's not where my head's been. My head's been in fantasy, but what's been coming out is these science fiction, AI kinds of things. So it might be fun to do a fantasy world build, but that is what we did last. We've done a couple of fantasy world builds, so I'm happy to go with science fiction. And if you want to do that, or I could
Okay.
do fantasy space epic.
Ooh, let's try that. Fantasy space epic.
Or epic space. That'd be different, right? So it's like I meant to say not space epic. I meant to say fantasy space opera,
Hmm,
but we could also say epic space fantasy, and those would be quite different, right? In terms of genre.
that's
Do you
true.
have a do you have a preference of whether it's epic space fantasy or fantasy space opera?
Let's hmm, those are both tasty.
Well,
Let's
I'm presenting the duel. I'm presenting the weapon, so you choose, right?
we're going full epic. Full fantasy space epic. That way we can really sink our teeth in.
All right, epic space fantasy it is, folks. So, what are the tropes of epic fantasy? And then we can translate them to space.
Big world. We talk about divinity, long lore. Lore becomes part of the heart thread of any epic. There is a either one mover or shaker, or there's many movers or shakers that are shifting the world, and they're doing so in a larger way. So that's the standing post for a simple epic. Now we want to throw space onto it.
Well,
Hmm.
I'd like to add a couple in those and typical epic fantasy tropes. They're you kind of drew the big blocks, but it's not necessarily the big blocks that are moving, right? Typically in epic fantasy, there is a party with a cast in that party. I don't The only epic fantasy that I'm aware of that doesn't really follow that tightly is Steven Erickson's Mythos Book of the Fallen. So and he just has a cast of literally thousands. Do you want to lean into that? Lean into the chosen one trope or the chosen ones or a small party kind of thing against the Dark Lord, or are you thinking something different?
I like the idea of the chosen ones, but I've also been really exploring the ideas of like legacy, and not having just one chosen one, but having a legacy of chosen ones, so to speak. Maybe not even necessarily a blood legacy, but a legacy of purpose. One of the things that I love about really epic stories is that they span years and years. This isn't, it's not resolved in a weekend. It's not resolved in 1 year. It's resolved in an epic journey, an epic conflict. It's not small. And part of the thing that I'm fascinated with is stretching that out in time to encompass more characters. Not necessarily a cast of thousands, but a cast that can come to some kind of story arc, and then we have another set of cast that has to carry that story arc further. Not necessarily a trilogy like we see in films lately, but more along the lines of one legendary story. So, what do you think?
Okay. I think that's interesting. So David Gemmell's kind of approach to that, or actually even Steven Erickson does a little bit kind of like that in the Models and Books of the Fallen, which I talk about a lot, but that's because it's really good. Yeah, read it. Okay, so world then. We have epic space fantasy. Epic fantasy set in space. So do we have a Dark Lord and gods or do we so typically like you were saying before, Dark Lord, gods, magic, separate kingdoms or star systems. Are we
Mhm.
just gonna translate that directly like that?
I like the idea. I mean, if we're going to talk epic space fantasy, then I want to pierce that veil and go complete outer darkness. So I want some outer darkness gods. So I don't want any, Greek gods running around with beards. I want giant tentacle monsters from the core of the universe or something like that, which creates kind of that sensation of hopeless chaos. And going to kill somebody like Cthulhu is a little bit more interesting to me than going to kill the Dark Lord and his posh seaside mansion. So that's what I'm interested in.
Okay. So these Dark Lords dwell at the black hole at the center of the universe. The gods are coming through there. Are they coming through the space between the galaxies or stars?
Mm, I like I like both, but tonight that idea of kind of like the black hole, especially after reading the article about black holes spitting out matter after they eat a star, has got me really thinking, what does this particular black hole spit out? And, half-dead gods or dreaming creatures from somewhere beyond, it sounds like a really interesting place to start.
Okay. Okay. So we have our Mordor, which is the even horizon surrounding dead, a gigantic dead star at the center of the galaxy. I like that. That's a long way away.
Mhm.
It's going to take magic to get there. Okay. So what? So we have the dark gods, no good gods, apparently.
I don't want any good gods. I want this to be definitely one of those protagonist versus divinity sort of stories where when we talk
Hmm.
about the divinity in this case, it is a warped version. So we have to keep the gods asleep or at bay in order to survive.
Okay. So what brings the humanity up to that level? Like what kind of levers and tricks are there in this world, switches that humans can flip to keep these to pacify these dark gods, keep them quiet? What kinds of things could do that?
I'm going to bounce back a question with the idea. I've read quite a few stories lately with like the progenitors, the group of intelligent creatures or a organization of intelligent creatures that came before that somehow elevates humanity into this precarious position, or they're the inheritors of the progenitors' problems. And while that's really interesting to me, it's also, I mean, we've done variations of it so often inside fiction and entertainment that I'm starting to see very specific tropes regarding it. But I also like the idea of humanity being desperately lost in its own understanding of where it is and how it got there. As part of the epic world and discovering part of the epic world, that gives us another kind of story arc that we can run with our characters. So, what do you think between those two choices?
I think I choose both. That is, I choose the dark gods at the center of the black hole, the galaxy, our galaxy, are the progenitors, and the only tools that humans have to fight them are the trash they left behind.
Mm,
Now, what is this trash? One man's trash is one god's trash is another human's treasure, as they say. I mean, a sword can be rusty and broken and bent and still kill you,
mm-hmm,
right? So just because a human comes up waving a rusty table knife, i.e., a god's table knife, and rams it into the heart of a dying star, I mean, it can really kill that star,
mm-hmm,
right? So I kind of like that. I kind of like I don't know what the hell this thing is, but because it has power, even if the power is kind of wonky and might drive you mad.
mm.
Will drive you mad for
Will do.
sure.
Absolutely. We need that. Madness is fun. This has got me thinking about like the art of H.R. Geiger, these great empty corridors that are effectively created by resins and chrysalis and body parts and long forgotten things, figures that are grown into the walls themselves. They make up the architecture. I love the idea of our groups or our parties or our adventurers or whoever they might be having to land on various completely quote unquote dead worlds looking for the junk that might help them keep the darkness at bay, or at least these sleeping gods asleep. I like the idea that it starts as a search for weapons too, but changes, subverting the idea of what a weapon can be. So maybe not the rusty spoon, but maybe the appropriate lullaby. I'm also thinking about, we've got fantasy, and one of the hallmarks of fantasy is the idea of different people. So, we've got the staid and true Tolkien-esque elves, dwarves, so on and so forth. But if we have multiple peoples in this, what I would like to concentrate on is making them more environmental driven, more like planet driven. So a little bit more like Star Wars, where we have a group of people who might come from a water world who look like fish. But I want to subvert this too somehow. I want to change this. The idea of multiple peoples in fantasy has always kind of chapped me a little bit. So how can we turn it on its head?
Well, fantasy races is really racist. So I'd like to skip that. I prefer to go with fantasy species. And so from that perspective, the multiple alien worlds that have aliens living on them that may need to band together makes a lot more sense. So just make them different species. You could have a hydrogen breather or whatever, silicon-based life forms. You can have, carbon-based or whatever. And so they could be really a heterogeneous mix of different species. The other thing I'd like to kind of raise as a rather gross and hoary trope from fantasy is that every member every member of a country is exactly the same. All of them. There's no factions unless the factions are relevant to the particular story you're telling. Other than that, if you have a troglodyte, all the troglodytes are the same. They all speak the same language. They all wear the same clothes. They all look the same and have the same customs. And that's just absurd. That isn't even true within a tiny country. Like, I'll pick your tiniest country. Luxembourg has multiple cantons that are completely different from each other. You're not going to get away with. I don't think we should let ourselves get away with that. So I would like the idea of, so we have these different species, different party members or whatever from a planet, but maybe they were different factions and they fight. So you have like the sharks and the jets, but let's make the jets octopi. So you have the sharks and the octopi are fighting, and they're from a water world, sure, but man, they don't like each other very much.
Mm-hmm.
And what's worse is that they have to share the same quarters on the spaceship because that's the water world quarter, and anywhere else they go, they have to wear freaking spacesuits to
Mm-hmm.
keep. I mean, something like that, right? It doesn't have to be the sharks and the octopi. It can be whatever. What do you think of that sort of trying to avoid a couple of strips at the same time?
Absolutely. Also, it's shoddy writing when, like you said, a gleep glorp is only a gleep glorp. There's so much opportunity for characters to be diverse within a wide body of culture that transmits into the epic itself. I mean, if let's look at like Gilgamesh. If we look at Gilgamesh from different camera points, we can have entirely different stories in it that are told by the same characters, which is a hell of a way to convey lore, competing lore, especially in a world where we don't know necessarily what the overwhelming push for these dreaming or dead gods to come through the center of the galaxy, but everybody's got a story to tell. And
Mm-hmm.
part of the epic is trying to figure out where those stories match,
Mm-hmm.
especially inside singular cultures or singular identities where those stories are fractured. That becomes a very interesting way of not only portraying this kind of fantasy politics that we might touch on, but it gives us an understanding of information not only as a weapon but a mode of control and a
Mm-hmm.
mode of confusion.
I like that. So in Gilgamesh's story is different from Enkaidu's story, which is different from Napishtim's story. And you could tell the story from all those perspectives. I forget this is the woman that Enkaidu slept with. I forget her name, but yeah, you can put them all together. I like that, and I like it. I like decentering the human perspective if possible. I think that could be quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and make the cast more interesting. And you see that in fantasy all the time. You see fantasy that has fairy or fae or Tuatha De Danann or dwarves or whatever you want. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem to decenter humans in this. Humans break out of Terra, and suddenly we're in a world that is a lot weirder, a lot less that cares a lot less about humans than we ever thought.
That would be an interesting thread to pluck in this particular kind of musical crescendo we're building in this crazy madness driven fantasy space epic is, what if humans are effectively the she what if they are the rare aspect? What if they are the important key to this particular thing? Other species are attempting to find the remnants of the humans to be able to interpret the remnants of the gods. We can have human characters, obviously, but they would be as rare as, what Tolkien might have deemed as angelic elves. We have humans, except instead of our superpower being, immortality like the elves, it's madness. Humans can somehow tolerate this madness at a higher level, or maybe not at all. They are the holy madness speakers, where you got to find the humans to be able to tell you the oracle that will get you closer to the center of the galaxy, which will get you closer to the weapon or the lullaby. So a post-human epic fantasy.
Post-human epic fantasy, meaning humans have a little bit further evolved. Is that what you're thinking?
Humans are almost destroyed. There are very few left. So maybe they were able to slow down the gods, but it cost them their galactic empire. And they were, instead of having them follow the progenitors, they are effectively our middle management progenitors. So they're between the gods and the other species, which is a flipping the old trope around, the ancient alien species that are part of the galactic civilization that have been there forever. And we put the humans in that center and then have the alien species be the new folks on the block. It throws it on its head, and that also means that the writing inside of it will be a little bit more difficult because we have to, as you said, resonate in some way to a human experience because our readers are human.
They're mostly human, at least. Yeah, no, that we can still use a human perspective, maybe a devolved human or something like that, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that all humans had. I mean, I like to say, all right, I'll roll with that. I like the idea that the alien, the dark god technology, progenitor technology, infected humans, drove them mad, and the humans attempts to maybe pacify or control some of this technology that broke. Are you familiar with Berserker series by?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there are these leftover remnants of the war between the Cthulhu or the gods, the old ones, the ones who came before, and a lot of it's trash, a lot of it's broken, some of it's still barely operational, and one of those barely operational godlike android, non-human android kind of mad creatures ate the earth,
Mm-hmm.
and humans had to figure out how to get out of it. Like, it actually ate the earth. Let's say time out ate the earth, and the humans are like, oh shit, we're in the middle of a thing. But they had to figure it out. They got some technology together, other scraps that this creature had eaten, and blew it up.
Mm-hmm.
So then they're possession of a dead weapon from ancient civilizations, and but also has spent the past 1,000 years or so inside the belly of a star planet devouring creature being
Mm-hmm.
slowly digested. Like, we burst out of the Sarlacc.
Mm-hmm.
That might change a guy, right? That'll change it.
Very much so. And it brings with it delicious stories of kind of a different kind of internment that can spread throughout our galaxy. Um, we need to touch on magic because this is going to be a fantasy world. We got to have really interesting fantasy magic rules. And I like the idea of playing around with madness in this aspect. So madness being power. That is also a way to curtail the magic itself. So in order to have the power to, for instance, teleport or travel to different areas, you have to be semi-mad or you have to be infected with some part of a dead god. So we have this idea that the magic is incredibly powerful, but it is also the same thing that is bringing the dead gods closer because it is the dead gods. But you have to fight fire with fire. But at what point does it consume? I that's a fascinating idea for me. Being a horror writer, I always want to up the horror. But at the same time, I'm really curious to see what other ways we can dig magic into this. We've subverted a couple things, and I'm enjoying the subversion. So, what do you think about magic?
Magic, I think, is necessary. I like it a lot. Um, what magic in this world would be like? I think one possibility, and it fits with your madness. So let's just pretend I'm a physicist. Let's say, to some physics, quantum hand waving here, right? Like, I'm not. All right. So uh, the observer changes the observed. The observer measures the observed, and that creates reality. Well, then, if the observer is different, the reality created is different. the observer has to be different enough to observe the reality that the observer wants to see.
Hmm.
And this is a cycle, this is a loop. So to see the world differently, to see the possibility of the world that is so radically different from our own, that you can teleport, that this thing that is here is not here, that is there. We know that that's not true. It's not just denying the reality, it's seeking a reality in which that is the reality and patching it into ours. But seeing it, recognizing it, and through that recognition of the state of reality, making the reality so. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that once you start seeing with these other eyes, you can't stop seeing with those other eyes. And the more you do that, the less you see what is the consensus reality, because you're used to seeing the reality that you see.
Right.
So you do it too much and you literally become lost, not in your own head. It's almost the opposite. You're lost in all the other possibilities that are out there, so that you're not here at all anymore, or barely here anymore. Does
Hmm.
that make sense? Is that kind of, and
That's
whether that's how the progenitors, the dark gods actually do magic or not, we have no idea. We don't know what they did. We just have these things that these artifacts left over that we can manipulate sometimes with magic, sometimes out, but we don't know how they did it.
hmm
Nothing about us looks like them. So a thing that might be a handle, we don't know whether it's a handle or a footstool or a place to put your face or something else. We have no idea. This
hmm
thing that shakes and cuts a hole through the wall, that could just be like this, like a vibrator from the dark gods. It's a sex toy, but it's a very effective weapon for humans. You know what I
Definitely.
mean? We have no idea.
I like that idea, and I like there's a channeling aspect to it that I really appreciate, and I think it fits within the parameters of the world that we're starting. Um, Here's the question about it. Is magic represented equally throughout our galaxy? Or is this something that we, like a character would have to acquire as they're moving through the galaxy? Are they born with it? How do they achieve power? You mentioned these artifacts, and I'm feeling like that's a good vein to puncture.
I think the artifacts could accelerate it. I think maybe this space around these artifacts is more permeable. I think that's a well-worn trope, but it doesn't mean we can't use it. Um, and so the more artifacts you have, the more puissant, more powerful you are. I think that also makes sense, not because the artifacts themselves are powerful, but just having these artifacts itself it makes it more likely that you can do magic in them. And some of the artifacts can actually do things in addition to that.
Mhm.
So just being a hoarder of these artifacts, just having a chunk off of the chunk off the spaceship of a dark god, that the muffler from his dark god spaceship that they threw away because they're getting an upgrade. That enough is enough to bring you closer, to allow you to reach beyond this world and start seeing others. Um, that goes along with the sort of dumpster diving aspect of magicians and magic in this world. It's like we don't know. Is this a I don't know. Is this what do you think? Is a broken pot? Yeah, sure, but that you can still use a broken pot, right? Maybe you can't hold anything with it, but you can take a broken pot and you cut something with it, right? So that's the kind of level of like just complete kludge magic is here. Does that answer? Does that sort of like
That's
fun with the question a little bit?
absolutely, and I love the idea of effectively this being, the great MacGyver magic, where you're trying to put things that do not go together to create an outcome that is uncertain to begin with. I really appreciate that, because it would take a certain kind of person to wish to even practice that. And it's not necessarily a scholar in this case. We put, that onus of madness back on it in a way that I really appreciate. And I like the place that it would have in the world.
So they're not ivory tower academics. If anything, they're moving on along the lines of an archaeologist, like
Hmm.
a field archaeologist, which brings in a little bit of vibe of Indiana Jones, obviously, right? So, but again, that fits in with the dark god potential. Like, talking about dark god, Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark, that was a dark god if I ever saw one, right? It's just
Yeah.
looking at the dark god destroyed everything. Um, so what do you think of that? Like the magicians, if you will, are effectively mad archaeologists who
Hmm.
have a bit of a hoarding thing going on, but it's not hoarding exactly. It's just the only way to get any kind of power is to have a lot of this junk around. So you have like junk, and you try and categorize it because maybe that can help, but it's still just a bunch of junk on the wall or in big boxes and stuff. And
Hmm. I like that idea. Also, it gives us a way to kind of straddle a line for what we're after. I mean, this feels like a nice callback also to the antiquarians from H.P. Lovecraft and the other people who are looking for the rare and mystical things. But I like the idea that the rare and mystical things are broken. I think that fits really well with this kind of this grim aspect of the epic world is that it's not necessarily about saving the world, it's about keeping it where it is because it's already broken. What came before is shattered, what's arising is not yet there, and trying to stop it from it being completely annihilated is about effectively sifting through the dust that was left over. There's a poverty to it that I really appreciate inside the magic.
so I wanted to talk a little bit about the archaeologist is one kind of person who does this. Antiquarians, as you mentioned, another. Junk dealers, yeah, secondhand dealers, flea markets are people who would collect all this stuff. What other ones can you think of?
Well, when you first talked about this, because I'm, from rural Montana, the first thing that I thought about is what we used to refer to as redneck engineering, where you would take one part of a vehicle and make it into a room on your house, and you'd take the rest of the vehicle and you'd make it into a different machine entirely. And it required both a sense of this crazy half-formed independence and not knowing that you could be killed by the thing you're doing, or even if you are, it doesn't matter. That it's not necessarily a freedom. It is the operating in sort of a technical poverty that creates an excellence that is somehow almost divine, but it's never beautiful. And I really appreciate that. The solution can be elegant, mind you. Like, I love imagining our antiquarian archaeologist, redneck engineers out there in an H.I. Geiger world, putting together the spinal column from a long dead something or other and creating something like, here's the next upgrade to our spaceship because we have to go over the Gulf of Sorrow. And I like this idea where it is not reliable. The machines are never reliable. It is the people trying to make them, the person who's most creative, who is least protective about their own soul or their sanity, who is the, let's say, brave, but at the same time, foolhardy enough to practice. Uh,
Reckless.
yeah, reckless to the extreme. I love it.
So baling wire and duct tape.
Baling wire, duct tape, and a few harvested souls. And there you go.
I like it. I like the redneck engineering, the flea markets, the places, and we can add in more as we go along. Estate sales, also street sweepers, garbage men,
Mm.
garbage collectors, who might be people who would come along and you know don't want the status quo. In fact, want to revert, want to get rid of all this really dangerous. It's dangerous. It is dangerous. It's wiped out entire worlds. Some guy in his backyard puts the two wrong piece pot shards together and the planet disappears. Or
Mm.
worse, everyone on the planet turns into green slime that's still alive. I like it. I like it. I like it. Okay. So summarize really quickly. It is a future. Uh, the 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 dead gods sleep at the heart of the galaxy in the black hole there. We don't know if they're dreaming in the event horizon or what things are happening. Maybe there's ejecta. I don't know. That's in the background. There are civilizations, some of them with spiffy stuff left over from when the dead gods transcended or ascended. Other not so much, just junk. This junk is magical. This junk is thins the veil between the worlds and allows you the user to maybe do things that the user couldn't otherwise or create things. The junk itself, whether the junk has a effect or not, it doesn't really matter. The junk just being itself. Um, think of it like a gun. You have a gun, it has an effect around area of effect, even if it's never fired, right? So yeah, they are the junkyard dogs, the junkyard gods, if you will.
Mhm.
Junkyard gods. I kind of like that as a ring to it. I mean, do you think we're at the point now where we can put together a party and like a quest. Can we put together a quest with this and a party to match it?
I'm imagining is because my brain is on full run now. I'm imagining a character that is comparing themselves to human anatomy. In some, there's a poster of a human or there's a sculpture of a human. In the world used to be a human world, but it is no longer that. It is not necessarily an old, out of the way rural world, so to speak, but it is a world of not much importance. And we begin with the idea of the difference. So this character is aware of the difference from the humans, and then we go from there and we can get that rolling.
And how about this? What if this character is an uplifted chimp?
Ooh, that would be interesting.
When when the world was eaten, everything got eaten. Everything got changed. Some things got spewed out earlier than others. Humans maybe threw things out in efforts to save them, throughout the whales, throughout the dolphins, throughout the chimps. These abandoned species, discarded by their own planet, discarded by the humans who had ruled the planet, transformed sometimes interestingly, sometimes horrifyingly by their travail, by their passage. I think that could be quite interesting.
I love the idea too of the character being able to say, well, I'm 98% human. I'm that close, and I love that to be like a character point of they're striving to either be human or to be beyond human or something, and stepping out of a shadow, whether it's one of their own creation or the defeated world or whatnot. I love that idea. And the chimp, as the uplifted chimp as a fantasy epic character is delicious. I think this would be right when I would send us to our pages so we could start writing. This is good stuff.
Well, Andrew, that is a wrap. I really enjoyed that episode.
As did I, and I hope our viewers did as well.
Speaking of our wonderful viewers, they can like, subscribe, and follow, and definitely tell their friends. And if they tap that little bell at the bottom there, they will be notified when our next episode comes flying around.
And speaking of this episode, if you would like to see what it looks like on paper, as soon as we write in it, that will be up on worlds.workingtitle.us if you subscribe for the writer and podcast support tier.
We'll see you again next time. And remember, we can create anything. Trust me.
And do.